Welcome to Reddit Aliens, travelers of lonely roads, explorers of the great outdoors, workers of creepy jobs and late night shifts. What's your scary story? Serious. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was the navigation officer for a research ship in the South Pacific. We had recently come to Papua New Guinea for some work along the coast. We had arrived in a small bay at around 10 p.m. in the dark and dropped the anchor. I went over to mark our position on the chart and noticed an annotation that said native village reported in the area. There were no fires or lights on the coast, so I didn't think anything much of it. I turned on all the deck and underwater lights and went back to the bridge to stand my night watch as everyone else went to bed. With all the lights on, I couldn't see further than about 25 yards because of a light mist in the pitch black night. I sat in the bridge with the door open because I liked the sound of the night and the feeling of the air in the tropics. I kept hearing light splashing in the water and went out to sea because often we get hundreds of fish in our underwater lights. There was nothing there. I went back inside but kept hearing faint splashing and couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Since I couldn't see into the distance, I went to the chart room and flicked on our infrared camera system, and there they all were. About 50 native outrigger canoes just sitting outside our pool of light. About 3 people to a canoe, and all just sitting and watching us, occasionally paddling one way or the other to keep their station. I've never felt so suddenly and violently alone and small as I did on that ship in the dark. I got a deckhand up and we both just walked around the decks to show the people we were awake and moving. They sat there and watched us all night, completely invisible except for on the infrared cameras. In the morning, they came in and traded with us, and were very friendly, and just hadn't had a ship in their bay for decades. I was driving down an old highway, not heavy usage anymore, during a snowstorm in 2011. Had a pretty close call on this particular trip. I was heading to the next town over with my girlfriend at the time, and we were behind an SUV on the road. We were behind them for a good while when they came to a stop. I maneuvered the car around to get a good look at why they had stopped. There was a truck in the road, driver and passenger doors open, and 2 sets of tracks in the snow leading off to the woods. I got out of the car to make sure no one was injured or needed help, but there were no signs of car trouble. There wasn't much snow built up on the inside of the car, so the doors hadn't been left open for long. It was snowing pretty heavy. I started to follow the set of tracks into the woods to check, but stopped. Before I could do much of anything else, the driver of the SUV called me over and let me know that the truck had been reported as stolen. They said highway patrol was on their way, so I went about my business. A day or so later, I found out the owner of the truck was a man who lived nearby that had been missing for over a week. The police went into the woods to look for him and found his freshly deceased body in a ditch with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Whoever took him beforehand must have marched him out there, executed him, and just wandered off into the woods. I'm still very glad I didn't follow those tracks. I didn't hear the shot, so it must have been right before we all arrived at the truck. I don't even want to think what would have happened to me if I persisted. Fellow late-night commuter or ne'er-do-well looking to do something sinister at night. Once I was working at a restaurant and got done around 12ish. I always rode my bicycle to and from work. It was about 15 minutes along the bike trail next to the train tracks. This trail was constantly straight, but had quite a few exits here and there. It also only had a few small parts of lit up by the streetlights, so without my front bicycle light, I would be totally blind for the most part. So, this one night, I'd leave on my way home after the shift, and I noticed a guy's biking behind me, which isn't too weird at that time of night in a busy but very safe city. It was weird that he had no lights and was still there after the first main exit, which after that led to a small town, but I thought it might just be a coincidence. I felt a bit creeped out and thought I might just be tired and the dark of night is getting to me, so I decided to bike a bit slower and let this person pass. There was definitely enough room on this trail. The person started drifting along at the same speed as me and made no attempt to pass or even come closer. This is about when I'm a few minutes away from home and decide to take some random lefts and rights instead of going straight home, just in case this person was following me and wouldn't find out where I live. I bike around, going in random twists and turns in a suburban neighborhood, and he's still behind me. What I then did, as I noticed I was heading straight for a long, small, dark path only for bicycles, I decided to turn into one of the houses and hide in the dark shadows from their garage. I heard the person pass the house and brake quickly in the small path. At this moment, my blood is boiling. Now I hop on my bike, and when I passed the edge of the street, I stopped and stared the person in the eyes. Well, that's what I hope he thought, because I actually couldn't see anything of his face. I biked so fast, then did another few extra loops here and there until I felt safe and alone again to go home. Never had anything like it afterwards, and still don't know who or why it could have been. I'm happy not knowing. I came back into my camp from cooking, cleaning, taking a dump, and found an individual digging around in my tent and gear. I quietly watched the person from a bit away while they rummaged around, eventually leaving while taking nothing. Packed up all my shit and hiked through in the dark. There's zero good things that could come from someone else looking through your gear in the middle of the woods as nighttime approaches. Don't know what they wanted, don't want to find out. Nothing like this should happen to another human being, but that being said, this outcome should not come as a surprise. I'm a little late to the party, but this one filled my nightmares for a long time after it happened. A couple of years ago, I was living in Colombo, Sri Lanka, at a small hostel in the outskirts of the city. The hostel catered to long-term guests, so I got to know everyone pretty well who lived there. There was a guy living with us, his name was Raj, and Raj was a middleman of sorts in the casinos. In Sri Lanka, the casinos are incredibly shady places full of Russian mobsters and other low-life criminals from China and India. The casinos are technically illegal, but they continue operation through bribery and government coercion. I went to one of them one time, and it was a surreal experience. Anyway, my friend Raj's job was to take online bets from Indian clients and make them physically in the casino. He was playing with their money and was simply the vessel to allow individuals to play from another location. He played in some high-stakes games, and with a lot of money for some powerful people, basically a recipe for disaster. One night, he effed up, big time. One of his clients managed to gain access to his online system and stole all of the money his clients had deposited to play with, a sum well over $50,000 US, which is a fortune in Sri Lanka. We only found out about the theft after Raj's disappearance. A note was left in his bed, very cryptic, saying, "Don't look for me," and "I'm leaving," among other things. Dude vanished overnight. We made a police report and waited to hear anything. After a few days, the police come back to visit, asking someone who knew Raj to join them. The locals in the hostels were afraid to go with the police, so I volunteered and was taken to their headquarters. They took me to the back, where I was shown photos of a body cut into pieces. It was Raj. He'd been cut apart and dumped into the sewer canal nearby by someone. They'd brought me there to identify the body. They never found who did it either, and the image of those photos had never really left me. I'll forever be haunted by it, and I left the hostel shortly afterwards. Poor guy was caught up in some shady stuff, but he didn't deserve that. I worked at a movie theater, and most often worked the closing shift. One night, me and another manager were sitting in the small office. She was working on the nightly deposit, and I was finishing up inventory numbers. We had a CD player that we would listen to at night with a stack of CDs sitting next to it. I stood up and changed the CD and sat back down. About a minute after, the entire stack of CDs launched itself across the room. One of the CDs hit my coworker in the back of the head. She looked around and saw me sitting there dumbfounded with the CDs scattered all around me and the office. We quickly finished up and left. A couple of days later, one of the other day shift managers calls me and asks me what we were doing the prior night. She seemed really annoyed, which was out of character for her because we were friends. I asked her what she meant, and she asked why she had dumped all the security tapes onto the floor and left them there. I told her we hadn't touched the security tapes at all. The tapes were stored on top of the CCTV monitor on a small VHS tape shelf. The shelf hadn't been moved and only the tapes were on the floor. She also said that all the sleeves from the tapes had been removed and thrown all over the place, too. Not exactly a lonely road, but I was speeding west on I-70 through Colorado near Glenwood Canyon when I decided to slow down and enjoy the view. I noticed a state patrol car in front of me a minute later when he turns on his sirens, and I think he's got me busted for speeding. Instead, he's pulling to the shoulder up ahead to help a broken down motorist. I slow down and remember looking at the motorist who's sitting in the driver's seat with their head down, thinking, man, that guy is lucky to get help out here, no cell coverage, etc. I keep driving west. A few minutes later, I start to notice police cars flying past me heading back east, sirens blaring, going extremely fast through a curvy canyon. One after another for like 15 minutes. Ambulances, fire trucks, seems like all emergency response in the country is headed back the direction I came from. The next day, I'm at a hotel in Utah and discovered what happened. Turns out the broken down motorist had skipped bail and, after being confronted by the state trooper who was there to offer assistance, exited his car and began shooting the officer in his back multiple times. On a normal day, the officer would have died as they typically drive alone, but on that day, he was headed to training and had a partner in the car who emptied his clip and killed the motorist. Officer almost bled out on the road but survived. When I was 18, my family and I took a vacation to Hawaii. My mother wanted to do the touristy thing and do the road to Hana. Normally, you can take a tour bus up it, but there wasn't good enough for her, so we rented a car. The rental companies typically forbid driving the road because of the liability issues. That didn't stop my mother. We had a normal drive up there, plenty to see. We spent all day exploring, so by the time everyone was exhausted, it was night. Now, we were a good ways away from the road down. Think back dirt roads of Maui. So what do? Go down some of the closed-off local roads. This one road in particular was a very narrow, winding road over the edge of the island. You couldn't even stop on the road to get out and pee. If you looked over the edge, it was straight drop into the ocean. Anyhow, so we were driving in the dead of the night, slowly, and we approached this weird bend that backs up to a heavily forested area, a small waterfall, and a cliff overhead just above us. My mother wanted to take some pictures of the moon, stars, and ocean because it was breathtaking with no city lights. So we pull off to the side of the road with just enough space to let another car pass you. I, of course, get out too. It was dead silent. Then, all of a sudden, I hear what sounds like a crying baby, which was weird. We were in the middle of nowhere and hadn't seen anyone for hours, so I'm just standing there confused and it stops. I motioned for my mother to come over and ask if she heard anything. She didn't. So we stand there for a little longer and it starts up again. Neither of us could pinpoint where it was coming from. Both of us were panicked because that's what baby crying does to most humans. We spent a good hour calling out and trying to figure out what to do. Eventually it stopped. We returned back to the hotel and never heard anything about it. The end. Once, my friend and I were hiking on an overnight trip to the summit of this peak. In order to get from the campgrounds to the peak, you had to, unless you wanted to cross a deep river, walk across the mountain ridges and then descend into a valley in order to climb out of the valley onto another set of mountain ridges. It is impossible to reach the mountain in one day, so you have to find a place to camp for the night. In this area of Alaska, everywhere is tundra and mountains except for the valley between the two ridges. There is cover from the wind there, so we decided to set up camp there. It is important to note that the campground has the only road leading to civilization for miles. To come from any direction other than the one we came from would mean the nearest town is more than 100 miles away. Also important side note, when we arrived, we were the only people at the campground. It is late at night, and we're trying to fall asleep when we hear footsteps approaching. Slow, human footsteps, and a raspy breathing. It was a human for sure, not animal. We were armed with a bolt-action rifle for protection from bears, so we asked who was out, and there was no reply. We then heard them knock over our clothes drying rack. I was scared shitless, and warned the person outside that we were armed. The footsteps suddenly picked up as the person ran past our tent opposite direction of the campgrounds. There was no shacking of a pack, so we ran, which I found odd. It was a sleepless night, and when the sun shone on the valley, we exited our tent to find our clothes drying rack in tatters, and there were small boot prints on the ground leading toward and away from our tent. We made it to the mountain and hightailed it back to the campground as fast as we could. I don't know who that was, but I didn't go camping for a while after that. I don't really know if it qualifies as scary, but I remember getting hit from behind by something while I was stopped in the middle of an intersection in the middle of the night last year. To this day, I don't really know what it was. I even saw the traffic cam footage and saw nothing. All I saw was me being stopped completely in the middle of the road waiting for a car in front of me to pass by so I can cross when my car shook like something had hit it from behind, and a minute or so later, it showed me parking to the side to check what had happened. The accident didn't leave any dents nor scratches, but it had enough impact to disalign my bumper. I've actively tried to avoid that road since. I was sleeping in a hammock on a mountain ranch and woke up around 4 a.m. After lying there awake watching stars for about 5 minutes, I heard the sound of something big urinating nearby. In the night silence, the sound was so clear as to distinctly change as the dirt went from dry to muddy to a small puddle. I didn't hear any movement afterwards. There are deer, coyotes, bobcats, and rarely bears in this area. Graveyard shift worker at the time. Won't go into details, but I stopped a guy from holding me at gunpoint and taking my vehicle while I was pumping gas. Station was closed. It was 2 a.m. Streets were pitch black. Guy comes walking up out of nowhere, asks where I'm headed, what time it was, etc., just getting me to talk. Nothing alarming, except he's fidgety and has his one hand in front of his leather jacket pocket the whole time. I say F it, was almost done pumping, decided if this was it, I'll make the best of it. And the guy needed whatever it is more than I do, so I say, need a ride somewhere? Was on my way home from work, but I've got a few dollars, we can stop for food because I'm hungry and don't mind having company. What's your name? Mine's Mary. I know that if you start getting personal with an attacker, it gets harder for them to hurt you. I was thinking, take me hostage, hold me at gunpoint, yell in my face, I can take that. But please don't take my life, and don't leave me 2 hours stranded away from home in the middle of the night. I got done pumping when I finished, giving him a short amount of time to think of his answer, and in his panic at me offering him the things he was going to take from me, he goes, "Nah, I'm just gonna walk, thanks again." Leaves. I carry a taser now. We are all collectively happy that you are around to tell this story, but this is a wild one. Salvadorian guy here. About a year ago, I moved to the capital city alone to study, and I met some friends for the first months there. I went to the beach about 3 or 4 times before this incident. I'll give you context. I have a 2011 Corolla, which isn't a fast car, and sometimes I get stranded in the street. The beach is like 20 miles away. The highway isn't in the best condition, but even with this country being as dangerous as it is, the road is really safe. We all packed our things and get onto the road. It was about half of the way, 10:30 p.m., and I saw a car next to the road. May have had a flat tire. I think twice before helping because vehicle theft is known in this way, but I helped them. I stopped and saw this bearded fat guy about 30 or 35 years old. He's obviously drunk, and he tells me that he has a flat tire, that he cannot change it by himself. He tells me his friends do not know that he left the beach. He needs to go home, and that his spare tire is in the back of the car. He accompanies me to open it, and before I know it, he hits me very hard on the head. The blow pushes me toward the street, and another man appears out of the bushes with a naked torso and a machete. I move around the car and quickly analyze the situation. None of my friends know that I am stopped on the street. My phone is in the car. I'm completely incommunicado. Both men are very drunk, but I'm afraid that they could still attack me as I'm completely helpless. I start walking around the car with them, watching me and trying to surround me. When I have a clear view of my car and the bearded man is on that side, I run like a cheetah towards mine and started as fast as I can to shoot off down the road. I hear a shot, but I have no intention of looking back. I call the police and, as expected, they just tell me not to walk through that area at that time because there were similar calls that week. I didn't travel alone in that area again, but unfortunately, I can't stop helping good travelers. TL, DR. I tried to help a man with a flat tire, and I was attacked by 2 drunks, one armed with a machete.